you, Ellen. Well, I want to thank you all for having me here. The only reason I'm here is because I am traveling as Brian's full-time therapist. We're working on this new kind of therapy called violation therapy. I'll be writing a book on it if anyone's interested. It'll only be $9.99. It's not really American self-help. And I'm not living in Italy right now because I lost my practice in the US. That's not, anything you hear about that, it's not true. So you know. But actually, I'm going to talk a little bit about how I've been transformed by Coventry. And there's been a lot of talk about evidence-based, right, skills. Look what's happened to me. I grew a nose, a coffee nose, as a result of all the innovative work happening here at Coventry. Now, I've been listening to people talk, and I've been pretty excited, and Brian and I have been giving workshops for the last couple of days talking about that cutting-edge technology known as the GIF, amongst other things. And one of the things that I started to realize as I heard the talks today, I heard Luca give a great talk about gamification. I heard a lot of talk about the notions of the flipped classroom. Brian indulged in nostalgia, which always brings me back, right? Questions come up about data, privacy, and the notion of badging, all things that led me a little bit astray. And I'll come back to this quote, but this quote is very important to me because a lot of what I do is I spend my time thinking about what is called trailing edge technologies, technologies that are probably not what you're talking about in your classrooms, not what you're talking about when you talk about innovation or disruption, but I actually think there's a lot to be learned. But we'll return to this in a moment. I want to actually go a little bit back to the future of EdTech, and I loved it. Fiona actually talked about Back to the Future. She talked about a student saying, the 1980s was probably a far more compelling time, which is strange to hear as a child of the 80s. I'm born in 71, so I was, the 80s were my time, my formative years. Because there was no surveillance. Isn't that fascinating? I'll come to that. So I went to the 80s, and I wanted to be culturally sensitive. So I went to Wikipedia, because that's how I do my research. I'm pretty thorough. I'm good and thorough. And I said, hey, what are some of the technological innovations in Britain in '85? January 1, the first British mobile phone calls are made. And I heard it sounded something like this. Right! Anyway. January 17th, British Telecom announced it's going to phase out its famous red telephone boxes. This is crazy. May 13th, the Dire Straits album Brothers in Arms is released. It becomes the first million-selling compact disc. We're moving into the moment of compact discs. And what's interesting here is my wife, Antonella, is from Italy, and the Dire Straits album, this was an important moment in her kind of definition of who she was, right? And they didn't understand what the words meant, so they were just having fun, right? They didn't know that this was really terrible music. I'm kidding. My brother's a fan. Okay, the other thing is, the James Bond film A View to a Kill is released, marking the last appearance of the single greatest Bond, Roger Moore, as the spy's sixth film. This is not his best film, though. The single best Bond film is For Your Eyes Only. But View to a Kill has the single best song, right? By Birmingham's Duran Duran. Am I cultural? Yes, thank you. This is culturally specific EdTech. But then we come to America, right? The real new cultural empire, right? Let's face it. You guys had your time. We took over. And things happen like this. The new Coke, right? Gorbachev. Microsoft released Windows 1.0. And maybe, I like that, woo. And maybe, we are the world, right? We finally came together as a nation and a world and produced something great. Reagan, round 2 of Reagan, right? Your answer to Thatcher. We are the world. And probably the single greatest thing to come out of 1985, Mario and NES, Nintendo, came out in December of '85 in the US. I think it actually came out technically in '83 in Japan. So for those of you who are game scholars, forgive me. So this brings me to a complete aside. I didn't plan on talking about this at all. at 7:30 this morning. So if this goes wrong, blame Daniel, because he said I could. This is an actual image of a living room that we built at the University of Mary Washington that is a replica of an imagined history of what a living room in 1985, forgive me, would look like. We got the televisions here, right? Those big TVs. We got a VIC-20 right there. We got a Panasonic 1985 original VCR. We have the Atari 2600, right? We have a Vectric system, which isn't here. There's a stereo system I'll talk about. There's a RCA, not a Laserdisc player, a Selectavision. Anyone remember the RCA Selectavision? Of course not, because it lasted 4 years. Started in like 78, and by 82, they had to throw it away because it was basically vinyl video discs that you would put into a player, but if you touched the video disc, you ruined it. So they built like a turtle-like terrapin around the disc. And to put this thing in was this complex, technical task. And you can see it up there, and we have a whole bunch of discs we'll look at. Actually, the discs are here. But what's the coolest thing about this wall besides the Cronenberg Videodrome poster? It's the paneling, right? I don't know if that was big in Britain, but paneling was big in basements all over the US, right? And so what we did, and I'm going to jump to the open web, so this is when you know I've already gone off the rails, and I'm going to actually look at some of what we did here. So I work with a professor, Zach Whalen, who's a media theorist, and he does media studies. And the idea with this exhibit, and why I'm talking about this, is because of these spaces and what's happening at the school right now. He decided, why don't we build an exhibit that's actually interactive and usable within the space? So without any permission, we went to the we actually went to the university storehouse. We got this couch, which is perfect. We got that actual piece of furniture which stores all the VHS discs. And we went about going on eBay, and that's us kind of being proudly building it, collecting. So I bought this on eBay for $20, right? This is the Panasonic VCR I grew up with. These are the RCA Selectavision the day after, right? I don't know if you know this. This is like the TV show they played to say, look, we're going to go at war with Russia, and it's all going to be over. And this is what it's going to look like the day after, right? It was kind of like, Leave It to Beaver meets Failsafe, right? Or Dr. Strangelove. It was this bizarre combination. And then we all collected all these Atari 2600 games. And that's my son playing a ColecoVision head-to-head football game that I played probably in 85, 86. This was Blip, the digital game, which actually was not digital at all. There was nothing digital about it. It was completely analog. But more than that, we went about building the actual space. So we took a corner of, and this is cool, a 2014 building. Like this building had just been built. We occupied a corner of it. We went to the theater department. They have a big shop, and we built out panel walls. We went on eBay. We bought about $1,000 of technology because 80s technology is still not considered important, so people are giving it away. And we actually built a living room. Now you might be saying, okay, look at you talking about all the things you built, blah, blah, blah. We also built an inventory of everything we bought. On top of that, we started to transform it into a teaching space. And this is where it gets awesome. We brought in a visiting artist from CUNY. His name is Michael Branson Smith. And what he did is he built a system that would allow us to put on programmed television with commercials from 1985. So we picked a day in 1985 to actually reprogram television, the whole day, commercials and all. And so what we had playing on that television was like The Young and the Restless or $20,000 Pyramid, you name it. We had some very interesting newscasts from 1985, communism. And this was actually about the changing face of communism and how China was changing the way it thinks about its economy. What an interesting moment, right? To watch that on TV as if you're in 1985. And then the students got in there with their vines, and they started actually remixing the space. So this is all done on Vine, capturing these moments of culture in that space. And I'm particularly in love with this because I love the Atari 2600 was, my crack in 1980. Cobra, little G.I. Joe. So here's a television, right? Like, this is something we don't see anymore, right? And that materiality of this space that we reproduced had real powers. The other thing is this is a cathode tube TV. Things look differently on it. And it's a very materialist vision of it. We got Florence selling us dish cleaner, right? Or Wesson oil. We have catalogs, because it wasn't just technology, it was also the various physical and material and periodicals of the moment. And this is a student, and this is all student-created work, putting in E.T., the single worst Atari 2600 game ever, right? Comic books, there was a foosball table, etc. What happened was we started to think of this living room as something that the students would program, build, and actually start to occupy. So over the course of a semester, the courses were using the media that was produced here as a way to think about a particular moment of time historically, right? So the idea when you talk about a flipped classroom, what happened if you actually built a space that you could actually reimagine as a historical kind of, how would we say it? A vessel, there's actually a way to say it right, a time capsule that not only showed TV, but broadcast 24/7, because this is for me when it started to get interesting. We figured out, and I'll talk about this in a second, we figured out how to not just broadcast it on one channel, but to broadcast many channels. So this is channel 5 and channel 7 programmed with all the television. And how did we find it? YouTube. And we actually went out, and students helped us create an actual program of the space. It's crazy. Now, this is a kind of British particular. Over the summer of 2014, we did a version of a class I teach called DS-106 called The Prisoner. So this is The Prisoner being broadcast, as you can see here, across 3 or 4 different televisions. And why is that possible? Because the broadcast is all being shot out of a localized antenna. So actually it was really being, we had a small antenna that we bought from China that broadcast out all of the video, and the TVs picked it up on that frequency. So when you change the channel, you were actually reproducing the media of that moment as if it were, or how it would be consumed. We didn't stop there. And when I did so I resigned from UMW, and when I did that, one of the things I did is play on the Patrick McGowan Prisoner, right? He goes in, he puts that down, and that was playing in the living room. Kind of fascinating moment where culture and television starts to, or at least my job, started to kind of wrap over. Look at this, right? This idea of going out, students. So here was an interesting thing about this. So you build it, right, and it's an exhibit. And the thing is, everything is usable. Nothing is like, don't touch. It's always there. It's always open. Nothing's tied down. Rather than people stealing stuff, what happened is people started to bring us stuff. So what started as a small collection actually became a collection the entire school was building. People brought us TVs. People brought us radios. People brought us turntables, etc. It was crazy, right? And at a certain point, they called it a fire hazard, and they made us put it down. They were trying, it was all guerrilla. It lasted for 10 months, which I thought was pretty cool. But they ultimately made us take it down. So what I did is, I put it in a room in my house. And I'm no longer in Virginia, but it's there, still, living on, kind of like in a VLE, right? In isolation, so no one can experience it. So, this was actually, when I saw this, it was interesting because Lucas said something that really compelled me. Like, we didn't want to build a learning experience that was educational, because that's the kiss of death. When you talk about educational game, I want to run for cover. That is the kiss of death. You want to build a platform and an experience that people take over and make their own, right? They bring to, they contribute. They try and understand what 1985 might really have been like, right? And experience it through not so much the TV shows, although that was interesting. The most interesting part of 1985 in terms of television were the commercials. What they sold, how they sold it, and who they sold it to. And there was a complete examination across all disciplines upon what that looked like. It was a fascinating incubator for thinking about culture as an academic community. I really was compelled by that, and it sounds that's a lot of what you all are trying to do here at DMLL. So how do you build a platform for people to help you do that? That's a real question, and you know what? That's what I spent most of my career trying to do. I spent most of my career trying to build platforms for people to build an educational experience. I talked about this before. I'll talk about it again. I'm not a very good historian. I've already alluded to that. So here is my brief history of centralized IT. I hope there's no Russians in the room. Okay, this is kind of what it looks like, right? There's someone out there playing ping pong while they should be setting up a WordPress instance for us. And he looks like that, right? They gave us email. They gave us storage. They gave us websites. This is what Olia Lealina calls the Dr. Professor page. And there's like she does like a whole exhibit of these online. She's a .NET artist, she's genius. But she talks about the actual aesthetic of academic presence online from 1993 through about 2000. And this is one of her shining examples. And I just love it, right? And I actually this is an OER, I use Brian's. This is the LMS, right? We started to build these closed spaces. So let's think about this for a second. I'll be very quick. We give people email. We give them some storage. We even probably give them some web space. We put it all on an LMS. And that's the experience. Controlled, centralized. Oftentimes when you leave the university in the US, at least, you lose your storage space, you lose your email, and you don't have any content here, right? It's kind of antithetical. On top of that, go ask for help. Isn't that awesome? Thank you, Tom Woodward. He turned me on to this. So I had a kind of really an epiphany, and it wasn't my doing. It's not like I saw anything come out of the sky. It was in 2007. I heard a podcast was actually a recording of a presentation given by this gentleman, John Udell, who was a writer about technology, who was an early innovator around things like how we imagine social networks. He wrote a book called Groupware for O'Reilly in '99, which many people think was the blueprint for what would be Facebook and the like. But he's also a really kind of like thoughtful, reflective person, unlike me. So I really I was like, if I can't make the point to you, maybe he can. So I'm using a little bit of his audio right now. And you can see the whole thing. It's online. Just search The Disruptive Nature of Technology, John Udell. It's an hour well worth your time. And he talks about three things, many of which Brian talked about early today. And I want to actually stop for a moment and have you listen to about 3 clips of about 1.5 to 2 minutes each of John Udell talking about 3 concepts. The first is coherence. What he's talking about when he talks about coherence is how we imagine technology at an institution. So I'm not going to say much more than that. I'm just going to let him speak.
It's brutally apparent to him that a lot of things that formerly seemed only possible in the context of relatively monolithic kinds of IT systems are now creeping in from the edge, just like you were saying, the PC kind of crept in from the edge 20 years ago, right? We're seeing that sort of a turn in the cycle of history again. And he just so wants to go with that, right? He so wants it to be the case that the university can embrace this kind of loosely coupled syndicated world, right? Where we didn't have to necessarily build the blogging system that you're using or the content management system or this, that, or the other piece, because these things really do interoperate. And students really can come to these things in an extremely lightweight way and use them really on their own with little overt support from us. And that's not flying. He's not making the case. And he's not making the case for valid reasons, which is that as things stand today, it's from the perspective of his bosses, the people that run IT and the people that run the university, there's a coherence problem with this kind of loose arrangement. In theory, yeah, all the student really needs to do is communicate to the school, this is the work that I've done at these URLs, and it's a network, and everything's interoperable over HTTP, and it all sort of works. And it all does sort of work, but that seems to be the problem, right?
And that's a problem that I don't think is trivial. That's a problem that many people who I work with, who I've worked with over the years, who I've gone and talked to, say that's an issue. There's not a sense of consistency and coherence across these web-based spaces that I can easily invite my students into an experience so they could share and work together, right? So this is a real, for me, this is like a foundational tension in educational technology, the idea of coherence. The next one that he talks about, very intelligently, is this really, I think it's a brilliant concept. And this is where he starts to get speculative.
And so they're sort of at loggerheads, they're not really getting past this. And I have been proposing to various people that there is an architecture which will kind of help us break this logjam. And now this is very speculative and it doesn't exist today. I can't point you to examples of it. And I can't prove that it's going to come to pass. But I have a feeling that it will, and I have, for what it's worth, a decent track record.
That's the only time I've ever heard John Udell humble brag. It's absolutely fascinating.
In terms of predicting these kinds of things. So this scenario that I'm envisioning, I've started to call hosted life bits. And the life bits part of it comes from Gordon Bell, who's actually a Microsoft researcher now, a former famous computer designer. And you guys may have heard about this or read, actually recently there was an article in the New York Times about his life bits project. And so, Gordon's project is basically to create this archive of all of the digital assets related to his life, going all the way back as far as scannable documents are available, but also moving forward in an era where there is high bandwidth networking and storage, and so he's actually capturing, close to real time, a sort of a digital log of his life, right? That's an interesting idea, I think, to all of us. It kind of harkens back to the Vannevar Bush Memex concept. But when I say hosted life bits, I'm talking about something that to me is very different in the sense that it's, when I say hosted, it lives in the cloud, right? So this digital archive of mine is not some sort of thing that's attached to my computer or that lives on storage that only I can access, but rather is a repository of my life work that exists in a place where it can participate in relationships with other people's repositories and with other people.
Now, this is 2007. What is he talking about? He's talking about the cloud, which wasn't even popularized yet. He's talking about us having content in the cloud all over the web that we share, a la Dropbox, Amazon S3, YouTube, Flickr, you name it, right? And he's talking about that as a hosted alternative to thinking about centralized IT. And the example he uses that I'm not going to play because it's a little long, and I think it's the example for me that sells it. It's not education. It's not, oh, I lost a paper I wrote for a particular class, I'm going to cry. It's I lost this digital image, or I lost this particular video of my life at a particular time. Or I had all of my records as a part of who I was and what I was doing as a thinker or as a scholar or as an artist have been lost. And he represents this as a real challenge to how we think institutionally about notions of architecture. And I think the final point he makes, which for me really starts to nail, and it's where I'll kind of move and end, is he talks about this notion of identity. Because related to these objects is a series of relations of people and networks. And within that relationship comes our notion of digital identity. And I think he really does a brilliant job of breaking some of this down. Let's talk about this.
And is one where, well, let's start at the beginning. So Susie is born, and Susie gets a social security number. And Susie also gets some sort of a digital token, which is a handle to this space in the cloud, which is going to be, in fact, her lifetime digital archive. So a couple years later, Susie shows up in kindergarten, and she makes a finger painting, and the teacher says, let's put the finger painting up on the school website, along with the other kids' stuff so everyone can see. And you know how that would happen now, and the teacher would collect all the photos, they would upload them probably to their content management system, and they would be there for a couple of years, and then they'll go away, right? Because the school's just not going to be in the business of guaranteeing any sort of reliable, permanent, durable access to that archive of stuff. What if, on the other hand, though, when the teacher says, Susie, let's take a picture of your stuff, she also says, give me your token, Susie, and she sticks the token in her camera, and the photos go up to Susie's archive, which is being managed for her by some service, which we'll speculate more about later, but is being managed in a really serious and robust way, really secure, safe, long-term way. The school, from its point of view, gets the same effect, but they get it by way of syndication, right? So they don't now have to store the photo. All they have to do is refer to the photo. And of course you can do that today, but again, you're back to that volatility problem, that coherence problem, right? Which is that, what is the likelihood that if 30 students have random stuff, on 15 different logging and photo sharing services, that I'm going to get a coherent result when I syndicate all that in, right? Because, just as it's not right now in the business model of the school to necessarily guarantee any kind of real permanence and reliability, it's also not in the interest of really any of today's breed of personal publishing services.
And that's a point that's really important. I just love his narrative about Susie getting this stuff. But then he goes on to talk about her getting her medical records, her dental records, all these things. And it's part of a piece of who she is, her hosted life bits. But he makes the point right now we're depending either on an institution or these third-party sites to do this for us, right? And one of the things that I think is interesting and worth talking about is that is established now, 8 years, 9 years after he gave this talk, so almost a decade, that is the business model. The business model of these third-party services is to not only harness our data, but sell it. And sell it as cheap, as widely, and as expensively as they can, right? And that puts us, as universities, in a particular situation. Brian brought it up earlier, so I won't repeat it, but Audrey Watters and Ken Lane, who are two people who are really doing some important work, I think, in the field of thinking about what's the relationship of privacy and data to us sharing and owning a little piece of our own web. If that is the new oil, what are we doing for showing our students how to manage, control, and maintain it? And we've heard a lot about that. Kate just gave a nice discussion about what that means more broadly in her Ignite talk. I actually want to build a little bit on Kate's discussion. Has anyone ever seen this video? I'm harking back to all the hits. 2003, 2004, this video comes out. Check this out. I love it. Hopefully there's no commercials.
Pizza Palace, guaranteed hot in 30 minutes or it's free. This is Mary. May I take your order?
Hi, Mary. Yes, I'd like to order.
Is this Mr. Kelly?
Yes.
Thank you for calling again, sir. I show your national identification number is 610-204-999-8-45-54610. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. I see you live at 736 Montrose Court, but you're calling from your cell phone. Are you at home?
I'm just leaving work, but I'm...
Oh, we can deliver to Bob's Auto Supply. That's at 175 Lincoln Avenue, yes?
No, I'm on my way home. How do you know all this stuff?
We just got wired into the system, sir.
Oh, well, I'd like to order a couple of your double meat special pizzas.
Sure thing. There'll be a new $20 charge for those, sir.
What do you mean?
Sir, the system shows me that your medical records indicate that you have high blood pressure and extremely high cholesterol. Luckily, we have a new agreement with your national health care provider that allows us to sell you double meat pies, as long as you agree to waive all future claims of liability.
What?
Do you agree, sir? You can sign the form when we deliver, but there is a charge for processing. The total is $67 even.
$67?
Well, that includes the delivery surcharge of $15 to cover the added risk to our driver of traveling through an orange zone.
I live in an orange zone?
Now you do. Looks like there was another robbery on Montrose yesterday. You could save $48 if you ordered our special Sprout Submarine combo and picked it up yourself. Comes with tofu sticks. Those are very tasty, sir. Good value, too.
But I want double meat.
Well, I'm sure you can afford the $67 then. You just bought those tickets to Hawaii. They weren't cheap, eh? But I see you checked out the budget beach bum at the library last week. Up to you, sir.
All right. I'll get the Sprout subs.
Good choice, sir. Gotta watch that waist if you're hitting the beach, eh? 42 inches. Wow. Man, I'd say tofu and sprouts is like required.
That's how much?
Just between you and me, there's a $3 off coupon in this month's Total Men's Fitness magazine. Your wife Betty subscribes to that, right? Anyhow, clip that and it's $19.99 even. Whoa, looks like you maxed out on all your credit cards. Bring cash, okay?
Want to stop this from happening?
So, like, we kind of laugh here together, but we're also, I don't want this to play, I hate that they automatically do this. Hold on, thank you. We kind of laugh at that a little bit uncomfortably because we live in the post-Snowden era, right? We know that this isn't actually a 2004 hypothetical dystopian video. Like, actually, this is really possible. And arguably, it's happened. So, if that's the world in which we live, I think the question's been raised before, and I'll just echo it briefly. How are we dealing with it? One of the things I love most about this video is when she says, we've been wired into the system. And what's his response? Right? Like, completely deflated, defeated, go home, it's over. Kind of like us. Right? Oh yeah, they're using all of our data. Oh. Right? Let's go to the 1985 living room and forget all of this, right? Because it was so much better then. And who do I blame? I don't even know if I'm going to do this. I was going to blame Canada, but I don't know if I have enough time. Because, do you want to see it? Oh, it's great. Okay. Oh, Brian, this is for you. This is part of your therapy.
It is. We must go find the source of it. But what is the source? Oh, that's easy. Times have changed. Our kids are getting worse. They won't obey their parents. They just want to fart and curse. Should we blame the government or blame society?
Or should we blame the images on TV?
No, blame Canada. Blame Canada. All their beady little eyes and flapping heads so full of lies.
Oh, that's awesome. It was an easy win, but I had to do it. Okay, that's right. We do blame Canada because it began in Canada, right? Like, part of what we've done, and this is kind of the point and kind of not, is for the last 4 years, I think we got lost in educational technology. And we got lost in relationship to this idea of the massive open online course, which as an idea, I think was really powerful. And when George Siemens and Stephen Downes and Dave Cormier started experimenting and thinking about this as a model, it was very much of a piece of what John Udell was talking about. A syndicated architecture where people had their own personal learning environments. And they syndicated into these spaces, and they shared, and they grouped, and they kind of networked like the web. And all of a sudden, right, it became this monolithic central IT system that we saw when we started with help desk. Not only that, it was an elite help desk. Like, if you're not an Ivy League school in America, sorry. What the hell were we doing? And schools were signing up not to be part of Coursera and the MOOC, but to actually say, I'm doing a Coursera class. Not a Duke class, not a Harvard class, not a Stanford class, a Coursera class. The logic was ass backwards. I mean, it really was. And this went on for a long time, and I don't even want to think about how much money as a kind of the Western world EdTech industry spent, because it's probably embarrassing how much money we spent. Embarrassing. When we could have started thinking about, I think, speculative, responsible architectures that start to make the case for building personal cyber infrastructures, making faculty, students, and staff managers, maintainers of their own domain, of their own space online. In fact, I was part of a project at the University of Mary Washington that was piloted in 2012 and that is still running strong. I'm no longer at Mary Washington, but it's in the capable hands of that group running it now, the Division of Teaching and Learning Technologies. And this project was interesting because it actually did turn some of those centralized notions of the monolithic LMS and the MOOC on its head. What it did is it decided to give any interested staff, faculty, and student their own domain. So jimgroom.com, right? studentY.org, professorx.net, and a web hosting space to build and create, to manage their own applications as well as potentially their own data, right? Here's two examples. Professor Andrea Livy-Smith, she's a urban history professor, or actually urban planning professor at the University of Mary Washington, and that's her space. That is her personal learning environment. She shares all of her work she's doing as a professor, all of her coursework, all of her teaching, all of her research, her curriculum vitae. This is the node on the web she occupies. And from there, she shares out to the various networks that she's a part of. Same goes for Professor, God, I've been gone for a little bit, haven't I? Stephen Farnsworth. I know. How I know? Because it's in his network. Look, it's in his domain. He's a political science professor. He does a lot of work on TV. He does a lot of work on Twitter. This becomes his hub. This becomes his space to share the various work he's doing as a professional. It's not a personal space for him, although, and Andrea Livy-Smith lives it a little differently. It's both personal and professional, so that's obviously up to you. Here's an example that I'm fascinated by. This is not at the University of Mary Washington, because the domain of one's own concept of giving students and faculty their own space to build these spaces actually is happening now at 35 different institutions in the US and Australia. It's actually kind of, people have seen some value in it. And one I love, and I can't necessarily, I don't know why I love to show it, but I do. This is Chloe. And she's not using this as her personal domain. She's actually running for office at the University of Oklahoma as a student. So she set up it as her campaign platform. Isn't that awesome? These are her supporters. Here's her on the bench, right? You know, kind of very like, I'm a judge already on the bench, right? You know, it's important stuff. This is visual literacy. Endorsements, involvement, right? This is kind of a notion of literacy of what she's doing. And I would much rather see this about her ability to actually manipulate and create than some link somewhere or in a VLE or some kind of relation or representation of it rather than the actual work she's doing. That's the idea behind narrating your work openly and online, right? You have a testament. It's called the URL. And you can point anyone to it to see it. What I also love about this space is it's not without problems. It's not without issues. Andrew Rickard is a student at Davidson College. One of the things he's pushed back about with his professors at Davidson is, if it's not, isn't my domain if you grade it? At what point does this become a space for grading, for assessment? At what point is the stuff I build there and create there mine? And something that I manage and maintain and own in some real authentic way. And I heard that term authentic come up today. And I think that's really important. Are we providing an authentic experience of the web for our faculty, students, and staff? I think if you can answer that question with a yes, you're golden. I don't care what tool you use. I don't care. Except if it's Drupal. I'm kidding. Okay. This is actually Andrew Rickard's site. Right? It's pretty cool. I want to know about this guy. I want to see, here's someone who wrote it. I get to write, and what do I see? Hierarchical file structures and femininity. I know I'm in for a kind of read, right? And for someone who's thinking about something. This is his outboard brain. Thinking globally for everyone. That was the promise of the web. That's the web I believe in as an EdTech. That's what I want to see, right? They have a very interesting model for domain of one's own at Davidson College. Mark Sample, who's a professor of media studies, broke it down like this. Develop technical and critical web literacies, forge a digital identity through online publishing, reclaim ownership and control over one's digital footprint, explore the possibilities of blending learning and social. I'll leave that up to you. It's got to say something. No, I don't want to leave it up to you. I don't believe in independence. Okay. Here's another example. I've showed this if you're through the workshops. I apologize. I won't go too deep into it. This is an example by Professor Sue Fernsetter, who's a historian of China. She had her and her classes, her and her students built a resource around the Taiping Civil War, a really kind of devastating war in China during the 19th century, one I didn't know about before talking to her. And they actually built a map, a timeline, and they interviewed an author who had just written a book on the topic. And if you go look, Taiping Civil War on Google, this will be the 4th hit. This is an open educational resource produced as part of an experience at a university. Are we doing that? Are we just packaging books and textbooks? Like, I know you guys don't worry about it as much, but in the US, it's painful. It's painful. Here's another example. This is actually a theme on top of a WordPress site that allows you to copy and paste only public domain works. I'd never put copyrighted work in something like this into chapters so that students can actually comment and interact around a particular text. It's just another way of thinking how this platform could be used. Now, I want to leave you with this. If I said, domain of one's own, it's an important thing, do it, there's a lot of ways to rethink how you build presence online. But I do think there's a broader moment afoot, and it has to do with this notion of the indie web or the independent web. This idea where you think critically, and we ask our students to think critically and our faculty to think critically about questions of data, ownership, connection, and networking. Questions about how viable is the open web as a resource for teaching and learning. And one of their acronyms that I really like is called POSSE. And this goes back to what Udell was talking about. Publish on your own site, little Susie gets that data, but then decides to syndicate it where it goes. To her school, right? To her doctor, to her insurance agency, and there's varying levels of security and control. One of the things that Brigham Young University is doing right now that I'm really fascinated by is they're asking their students to become managers and maintainers of their data. And the school's IT system would call to it and say, can I use this data and for how long? How interesting would it be for all of us to see how many times our university uses our data and how? And for us to have some control over when they can and when they can't. That's a negotiation. And it's a negotiation that we should all be able to engage in the 21st century. The technology is there. It's not a technical problem. It's a cultural problem. I think more and more, if data is the new oil, then wars are going to be fought over it. And part of our role as a university, I believe, is to be educating people about the implications and what it means culturally. I think, really, this is a space, and I've seen it over the last day and a half, 2 days. This is a space where people are being asked to think about that. The disruption is a disruption of a model of thinking, of a culture of accepting. And if anything's going to be disrupted, it's our kind of, as Brian alluded to, kind of placidity, right? Our acceptance of a status quo that I don't think is working for us. Now, someone who I really think is fascinating, her name is Amber Case, and she considers herself a digital anthropologist. She's onto this whole new thing now. She's one of the founders of IndieWeb. But she moved on to this thing called calm technology. Has anyone ever heard of it? No? It's interesting. You should look it up. I can't speak too intelligently about it, but it does relate in some interesting ways. I'm going to end with this quote by her because I actually think it's relevant and useful, right? So from the earliest times, humans had tools like hammers that extended our physical self. Today's technology extends our mental self. It's changing the way we experience the world. I firmly believe that. I firmly believe it's impacting the way we understand notions of identity, we understand notions of social relations, we understand notions of economy, right? Notions of scale, notions of global, all things that we think are crucial to an education. So how are we integrating that thoughtfully, mindfully, importantly into our curriculum? That's a real question to ask. I appreciate your patience in dealing with that long digression to get the end. I want to thank you all.